Hey, I'm Caleb, part of the Narrate team. This is part 2 of a series called Stuff. This week, Adam asks us the question, can you enjoy something without having to own it?
Hi, how are you? Some big games today, you know. Just wanted to say, yesterday in the wood splitting deal, way to go. I kind of stood back there while we were standing in the yard and not only super proud of the staff and especially Sarah and her orchestration of all that, which is a lot of chaos that she's made a lot of sense out of, but I was just so proud that, we said a few years ago, almost 5 years ago now, hey, let's create a church where we serve people, even if those people don't necessarily care about God and Jesus and church, and let's serve them anyway. And it was just fun to step back yesterday and see that in action, and even to see that it's not the same 40 people scattering every time, which is fantastic. It tells me that you're all engaged on different levels and at different times, and so way to go. Sure love being in the church with you guys. This morning I want to explore an idea, and I think, maybe I hope, but I also think that for many of you, maybe for most of you, it'll actually be a new idea. And I know that sounds a little bit pretentious, like I've been up in my high office studying and I've thought of something that you all peons have not thought of, and it's not like that at all. The reason I say that, and I typically wouldn't say that, is what I realized in the kind of the work leading up to this series is that there was an idea that my friend Fred taught me about 15 years ago that has been incredibly valuable to Teresa and I and our family in terms of navigating this stuff conversation. And I didn't realize how useful it was until I studied for this series the last 6 months. See, part of what you got to know about us and the bent around here is I think, and we think it would almost be malpractice for us to not engage on this issue of finances and stuff almost every year or real close to every year. Not because we want your money, not because God wants your money, not because we're naive to the fact that it's an uncomfortable topic, but because we live in a really affluent culture, and the scriptures have a great deal to say about money. In fact, Jesus, the only thing he talked about more than money was the kingdom of God, and that was a pretty big deal to him. And over 50% of the parables he told, they lean into money, they rely upon those types of illustrations. And so it just strikes me that, and we see it play itself out every year, that we hate it, but you love it. It's this kind of tension, which is typically the way things that cause us to grow work, right? And so for the last 6 months, in the last couple of years, when we've addressed this issue of money and or stuff, I kind of identified early on, okay, here's the direction we're going to go, here's the thread. Parenthetically, here's the series I'm going to steal from somebody else who's done a lot of really good research. And this year just didn't have that, wasn't inspired anywhere, wasn't sure which way I was going to go. And so I can't tell you how many books I bought on my Kindle and kind of skimmed them and /read them, and how many commentaries I saw on different key passages, and how many messages I listened to. And what finally occurred to me on the back end of almost 6 months worth of research here and there was the realization that this idea that Fred taught me about 15 years ago, this guy who was an insurance salesman and a really good Christ follower and was helping me when I first started following Jesus, what he taught me was quite rare. I mean, it almost never comes up. I didn't read it in my research, not once. I heard one little mention of it in a podcast I listened to. And so I just went, wow, okay, so we got to deal with this. So this principle, I think, will be new for you. Even if it's not new for you, it probably will give you some vocabulary, from some language. And where I'm especially excited this morning is, even if you're someone that you're not necessarily here for the Jesus thing, you're here because he's here or she's here, you're here because you're intrigued but you're not there yet. I think what we're going to talk about this morning it speaks to every life, no matter what your worldview, so to speak, or your spiritual beliefs. The idea, if I could just stop rambling about it and give it to you, and I'd like to give it to you in the form of a question, is simply this: can you enjoy something without having to own it? Can you enjoy something? See, I think Jesus, and we'll get to this, the way he talks about stuff isn't anti-stuff, and it's not even necessarily pro-stuff for stuff's sake. It's a way that kind of transcends stuff and doesn't make stuff the issue, but makes God and people the issue, and thus learns how to enjoy those things without being distracted by stuff. I saw this play itself out for me this last October. My wife and a team, some of you were in Ecuador on a trip with Families with Heart. And this one couple, a great couple without kids, they invited me and the boys over for dinner one night. They were just trying to be nice and thinking that the boys might get sick of chicken nuggets. And so they invited us, and they just live in walking distance. They had an apartment by our house. And so that evening we walked to their house and their apartment, and they kind of gave us the tour. And it's this real modest apartment and kind of neat. And And then they explained that what we were going to do was we were all going to make our own pizzas, which, like, I'm going, this is fantastic because my boys get to do this and it's not at my house because there's going to be cheese everywhere. So this is like a win-win. And so that's like, where are we going to cook these things? And the husband gave me one of these, and so we walked out this long hallway and outside, and there was this power cord going through the kitchen window because, apartment kind of complex thing, and connected to the extension cord was the most amazing barbecue. Like, this thing was incredible. Now, I'm like not a barbecue guy. Like, I don't look at magazines of barbecues, and I'm guessing I don't lust after barbecues. Like, I normally wouldn't like think in the direction of barbecue, but this thing was amazing. I'd seen one other time in my life. It was when I was doing grad school work in Portland, and there was this family that I would stay with, and they were in this socioeconomic bracket that I'll never be in, and they had one, and it was incredible, but you know how that goes, like, I'll never have a Porsche, so I'm not even going to, like, think about a Porsche. They had one of these barbecues, never thought about it again. In fact, it was one of those, it's like this big, and now I understand they have them at Costco every once in a while, and it was one of those smokers, with the electric auger and the hopper where you could put whatever wood chips you want into the hopper, and you could have apple wood, and you could like smoke things at a really low temperature for all day long. That family one time, they smoked for us a fresh salmon fillet. It took them like 10 hours. It was amazing. And then another time they smoked lamb for us. It was disgusting. And then another time they smoked, I think it was like a beef brisket or something. Anyway, so I'd seen one of these things, never thought of having one of these things, but then here's my friend and his barbecue, and I'm going, wow. And you know how your brain just like, and like, I'm not a barbecue guy. Like, when I barbecue, I burn stuff. My wife wishes she would have barbecued. Like, this is not my thing, but I started to think about, like, I'm going to have these parties, and there's going to be this amazing beef brisket, kind of like the Happy Gilmore kind of like fantasy thing, like there's going to be people and they're going to be so amazed at the food that we're serving them, and it's just going to be like, I'll give them this beer that I made and this stuff that I smoked, and it'll just be awesome. And like, that was the rest of the night for me. Do you know what I mean? And like, I kind of enjoyed the dinner, but mostly I was thinking, like, it's October, next month's November, my birthday's in November, and then Christmas is coming up. It took me a couple weeks to wind down from that. Do you ever do that? And you're just like, no, like, I don't need this barbecue. See, I think that's what I'm getting at when I say the ability to enjoy something without having to own it. It's the ability to go to a friend's house and like watch the game on their TV, and their like nice TV and the nice chair and the nice theater room and the nice crock pot with the cheese. Did you know there's a Velveeta shortage? I think they could find a refinery to replace it. I'm not sure, but anyway, it's the ability to like take in this party and not leave having to go buy a new TV. The ability to see your friend's brand new guitar and not have to buy a new guitar. The ability to ride in their car and not suddenly feel like you need a new car. To go to their house and not suddenly feel like your house is too small. And I think it's a really, really difficult, if not simple, like there's that like concept easy, live it out hard. And listen, even if you don't think the Bible is from God, like I do, but even if you don't, one of the things that I think is valuable is just to simply recognize that this is one of the oldest collections of human perspective and wisdom that we have. And so even if you don't believe in the God thing, but if you just think, if you believe in wisdom, then this becomes valuable. And what stands out to me is in this ancient culture, they had the same tensions we have, and they were trying to define, like, how do we live in this society, and how do we love people and love our families, and how do we do this? And they ultimately boiled it down to 10 laws. So the Jews would call it the Decalogue, these 10 commandments. I mean, think about that. If you're going to boil down your value system into 10 things, that's tough. And the 10th one was they just simply said, hey, you ought not covet. Like, not after, like, your neighbor's house or his wife, or his ox, his iPad, his barbecue, his guitar, his home theater. Like, it'll just wreck things. See, last week we started this series on stuff by talking about the tension created by our appetites. And I don't have time to get into that. You may enjoy listening to the podcast of that. But what we said was that our appetites create a tension because no appetite can ever be fully or finally satisfied. Good, bad, other-centered, you-centered, none of them can ever get fully and finally satisfied, and that creates a tension that we have to manage. This morning, I think the tension that I'd like to suggest that we have to navigate comes from the fact that God is pro-stuff. And we don't often think of him like that. But if you go to the very first page of Scripture, what Scripture tells us is God made it. Like he made the physical world. And that seems innocent, but in his day, in the day of the writing of this, in Moses' day, that was incredibly controversial. See, the theological conversations then, they weren't about like public health care. They were about, is the material good or bad? And the way culture leaned was this idea that said physical things are created by this evil God, and this evil God is in conflict with this good God, and this good God created the spiritual, like non-material world, and the bad God, he created the physical world, and so at best they're neutral, but mostly they're bad. And so when the scriptures stepped in and said, hey, God made it all, it was controversial. And he's making a statement there, like it's his. In fact, some have pointed out that the biblical story starts in a garden. I like to think of it as a pile of Legos. It ends in a city. Like a God who's anti-material doesn't have you spend the rest of eternity in a city. Because, see, a city's, it's stuff. A God who's anti the material, like he's the one, like he would have you exist in the clouds with that chubby baby with the fat rolls on his arms and the diaper thing and the wings and the bow and arrow, like that. So there's a tension. And the tension, and you know it and I know it, whether or not you've thought of it before or put it in words, is God invites us to enjoy stuff while at the same time not getting ruined by it. The Apostle Paul picks this up in a letter to one of his closest disciples, one of the guys that he gave his best, he emptied his cup into, you might say, in 1 Timothy 6. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. Now, we did a whole series on that called How to Be Rich a couple years ago, so you can go back to that if you'd like, but listen to this. God who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. See, there's a tension there, because the God of the Bible is not anti-stuff. Christianity is not an anti-stuff movement, despite what you might think about Andrew Luck's Amish beard. Like, it's just not... It's not an anti-stuff thing that we have to navigate. It's a pro-stuff. And that's tough. I saw this play itself out in my life this last Christmas. My family and I went back to Billings on Christmas afternoon. You don't care. I don't know I'm telling you these details. But anyway, we went back, and our plan was to go cross-country skiing one day. We'd heard that Red Lodge has this great new outdoor Nordic Center. Have you been to that Nordic Center? It's fantastic. And my wife and I, we cross-country skied when I was dating her. I had the courage to do that, and I haven't done it since. So we've done it a little bit, and then we haven't done it. Our kids have never cross-country skied. My dad and my stepmom had never cross-country skied. My sister and her daughters had never cross-country skied. So we thought it'd be fun to cross-country ski together. And they all agreed. So we went to the base camp. We rented cross-country skis, super affordable, drove to Red Lodge, skied for a couple hours on this great thing with little kids and all of us, no experience. Had lunch at the car, went and skied for a couple more hours, came back, and everyone, including my dad and stepmom, who aren't recreationalists in that regard, everyone was like, oh, this was a blast. And the moment we started taking our stuff off, where do you suppose the conversation went? I got to get some skis. And my dad and I had my phone out, and I had my Evernote, and I was writing down the length of my skis and the length of my wife's skis and the poles, and making sure I had good notes so that when I bought them, I knew what to buy. And my dad and I, we got to get some of these. This would be fun. And blah, blah, blah. Never mind that we'd done it once in the last 15 years. And as I was pulling out of the parking lot, it was when I kind of further became solidified, we got to talk about this stuff at Narrate, because I just had this sense of the Lord going, hey, careful. This brilliant day where you enjoyed your family, and we can all appreciate how you make memories when you're doing something physical in ways that you don't when you're just sitting on the couch. Brilliant day. And if you're not careful, it'll all be lost in the need to own skis. Weird, isn't it? Saw it happen with my kids, and I see these tendencies. We went to the beach this last summer in Washington. Some friends had us out, and it was a blast. And they took us to this beach that kind of wasn't the tourist beach, so to speak. And so there's actually seashells on this beach, which there aren't a lot of them on the Sound, but there were quite a few. And what do a bunch of little boys from Montana do when they see a beach covered in seashell fragments? It's the only thing they do. They wedge them into every nook and cranny, and they stink. And we brought this bucket home, half full of seashells. Guess how many times my kids have asked me about those seashells since I took them out of the back of the Suburban? Every parent of a kid, 0. They don't even know they exist. Now, I understand little kids, seashells, that's all fun, but there's kind of a metaphor there, if nothing else, isn't there? Because literally, they spent the day staring at the seashells. And if you're not careful, you collect and you miss this. You miss it. Did you know that one of the best business investments you could have made 25 years ago was in self-storage? I did a little bit of research on this, but self-storage plazas, I don't know what they're technically called, would have been one of the best uses of your money 25 years ago. Why? Because we've got these houses with garages and attics and extra bedrooms and 3,000 square feet and sheds in the backyard, but there's not enough room to store our stuff. So we spend $70 a month to reserve this place, and what's in the storage unit? The skis, right? Like the stuff we had to have that we're never going to use, but we got to make room for the next set of skis. I saw a poll recently. They asked Americans their favorite type of recreation. I'm going to give you permission to laugh. 34% of Americans, when asked, what's your favorite thing to do for fun? The answer was shopping. That was the most common answer in the poll. Like, I'm sorry, but that's pathetic. I mean, okay, maybe harsh, but like it illustrates it, doesn't it? That there's this tendency to define it by possessing it. I saw this last fall. I have a good friend who likes to hunt, and I don't like to hunt, but my boys would like me to hunt, and I like to take an interest in my friends, so I've kind of taken an interest in hunting, and I'd said to him, I don't know, in the late summer, like, hey, like when elk season comes around, I'll go out with you. And part of that was driven by the fact that a mutual friend of ours had moved, and I knew that like he was the guy that when he shot the elk, this guy went with him and he drugged the elk out. So I'm not that guy, but I said, I'll go with you, and I'll like cheer you on as you drag the elk out. And great, he said, we'll go. And he filled his tag during archery. So he said, well, you should buy an A tag, and we have this pretty easy access, this place where we can go hunting, and so bought an A tag, and he did all the work, but we got up opening day, drove to this place, had this incredible hike in the dark, incredible / anxiety riddled, and we hiked up into this pitch black place, and we got to this little, I don't know what it's technically called, like this little rolling hill before the main ridge, and on the main ridge, what I'm told was 330 yards. I would have never known that, but was a herd of 125 elk. Just before the sun rose, like silhouetted into the, like on the ridge line. And the lead bull didn't have that vocabulary before that morning, but had that vocabulary. The lead bull was a 6x7. You know the Hartford, like their logo, that black elk where you can see that's what it looked like. And we're laying there, and he's like, "Well, put that big one in your scope." And I'm like, "I can't see through the scope. How do you see through this thing?" And I'm trying to wrestle with that. And as all that's going on, like what we didn't know was half of Helena was on the same ridgeline, and someone took a shot from the right and hit the 6x7. And he's like, well, you might as well take your scope off the 6x7. He's done. And the herd moved. I think it just moved a little bit. And I'd never watched the bull elk kind of lay down and stand up. And all you ladies are like, whatever. And then someone else took a shot. Or he took, I don't know what it was. But I think it was the second shot when the lead bull got hit a second time. The herd split. And about half of them came sprinting directly down this hill. And we were just on the other side of this, I don't know if it'd be called a saddle, but this little roller kind of peeking up over the edge. And they came they were going to run right over top of where we were. Like that was their direction. And at no more than 10 yards, the lead cow saw us, eyes bulged, and they sprinted around us, again, at no more than 10 yards. And I remember turning, and I'm supposed to be watching this 5x5 who's still readily available. And I'm going, this is amazing. There's these elk like powering by us. So this 5x5 came rested right in the little saddle at 100 yards. And I had him, and I'd asked my friend the day before, like, what happens if I hit a spike? And he's like, you can't take a shot if you might hit the spike. Which I'm like, well, then I shouldn't have a gun because... but I had just a couple seconds to make a decision, and then it moved so that like the hill cut it off, and then someone shot over our head. And so that was kind of a rodeo, and the thing spooked, and someone else shot the 5x5, and we walked up and looked at the 5x5, and there was almost a fist fight over the 6x7, and it was just fantastic. But as we're hiking out, couldn't have been more than an hour and a half after the whole thing's over. I was just that ill feeling, like, I was this close. I was thinking, like, Teresa and the boys were back home, and it was a nice day, and how fun that would have been to spend the day packing this thing out, and never mind how unjust it would have been had I shot a 6x7 on my first and only elk hunting trip. Would have been fun, though. And I just was angry. And it was my friend who kind of started to help me with that and reminded me of this principle from Fred. And essentially, where he took the conversation was, like, that was amazing. Like, that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience to get that close to that kind of herd of animals. And then I just started reflecting on this memory that I'll have with my friend forever and blah, 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 blah. I mean, just these incredible things. And it just hit me, like, there we go. We have this propensity to only be able to enjoy things that we can possess. That we have to have a souvenir, which is why those gift shops make so much money on our pathetic persons. We have to, we can't validate the experience without owning a piece of it. See, I think the ability to enjoy something without having to own it, it's the ability to get in the car, to go to the house, to go to the Super Bowl party, to see the TV, to enjoy things that you may never have and you don't have the budget for, but not have to have them. And I think the inability kind of speaks to our American economic situation. Like, did you know that the average American saves less than 1% of their annual income? Less than 1%. So essentially, like, take a pie, and the average American says, I need to consume 99% of it, which tells me we don't have an issue with money, we have an issue with stuff. We don't necessarily like money, that's why we don't keep it. We like stuff. Unless you go like, well, yeah, that's perfectly normal. 25 years ago, the average American saved 25%. 25 years ago, the average American saved 11% of their annual income. Unless you go like, well, tough economic times. In Germany today, it's 13. Good old Germans, they know how to save. In Switzerland, it's 14. In China, it's 30. There are people who don't consume and spend every cent on their stuff. This one maybe is a little uncomfortable, but did you know that over 75% of Americans don't have enough in savings to cover 6 months' worth of expenses? Which means over 75% of Americans, if the faucet gets turned off in 6 months, they're toast. Now, that's work. But see, that's the tension. Like, you can still go cross-country skiing and have a 6-month savings account. What you can't do is necessarily own it all and still have a 6-month savings account. Did you know that over 50% of Americans don't have enough to cover 3 months' worth of expenses? Did you know that over 25% of Americans, if they don't get paid on February 1st, they can't pay February's bills? Over 25%, it's paycheck to paycheck. The current number of Americans living in a home that exceeds the value of the home, 29%. The average credit card debt, so that's just just simple math, number of Americans divided by credit card debt. The average person has $8,500 in credit card debt. See, here's my question. My point isn't bony finger in your chest, like da-da-da-da-da. My question is this. Do you think the people who are represented in those percentages, are you enjoying stuff? No, you're stressed out, freaked out, scared, running thin. See, here's what's funny to me. I don't have a lot of scripture this morning because there's just this one, there's a second one too, but Jesus is so darn cool because he tends to take our preconceived notions and just flip them on their head. See, I think if you were to go to Target and stand outside Target today and say, hey, how does Jesus feel about stuff? Don't you think the average kind of person on the street would go, he hates it. It's immoral. He shouldn't own it. Should give it all away. Should give it to the people in Africa. That's not what he says. He actually wants us to enjoy stuff. Then he said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. He doesn't say you can't have possessions. He doesn't say you can't own anything. He seems to just make this very simple observation that we all know from our storage units and the stuff that we own that we don't necessarily have and the souvenirs that we had to have in their dorky t-shirts anyway, that if we're not careful, we define life by the ability to possess. He's going to just be careful with that. Because it's not all about possessing. There's more to it than that. In Philippians, there's this verse that probably if you've been to church only one time in your life, you've heard. And if you've ever started following Jesus for the first time and your family gets to this awkward, don't know what to get at him for Christmas anymore because he's religious. So they buy you golf balls with this verse on it. This is the verse that whatever your thing is, they go to the Christian bookstore and they buy you a notepad or, I don't know, a pen. And it's this verse. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And it's because of this that we can find parking spots and get A's on tests. But listen to the context of this verse because it has everything to do with stuff. Now he starts, what Paul's referencing here is that he was recently given a gift by this church called Philippi. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned but had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. See, the context is that contentment is learned behavior, that it requires God's grace, that the person who actually can live content and not have to own everything like burns grace like rocket fuel. That the ability to be satisfied with God's current level of provision in your life is learned behavior. That the ability to not have to own everything and not be in debt and get caught up in that comes from God's grace. What if, quite frankly, that our incessant need to own actually robs us from experiencing stuff the way God wants us to? What if God is not anti-stuff? He's pro-stuff. But because we are so pro-possession of stuff, we actually miss out on the gift of it all. Heard a story, and this was actually the one reference that I'd heard to this whole deal. It was a story told by a guy named Bill Hybels about a Wheaton professor in the early 1970s. See, in the early 1970s, this professor, he had this route that he would walk to school. And as he would walk this route, there was this one house that suddenly what appeared in front of this house, this is so weird, like so early 1970s. Sorry if you were alive in the early 1970s, but it didn't have a lot to do. Because what he was distracted by was this house had this really neat sign by their mailbox. Like they'd purchased this new sign, I don't know, like a router, and then they took a torch and made that funny black grain stuff. Just kidding. Anyway, I'm distracting myself. Apparently, this house had purchased this sign, and they really liked this sign, and he really liked the sign. And it was really neat, and it was really creative. And he literally, for a few days running, would look forward to his walk to work in the morning because he'd look forward to seeing that sign. Just kind of stand and look at it. This thing's amazing. And then without really thinking about it, he changed his route. He stopped walking that way. Because what had began to happen was he started to resent the sign because he wanted the sign. He had to get himself a sign, and he couldn't figure out where to buy the sign, and he couldn't get his wife to agree that they needed a sign, and he wasn't sure where he'd get the money to get the sign. And then he said that he just sensed God kind of nudge him and say, might you develop the ability to enjoy the sign without having to own it? See, that's learned behavior, isn't it? God's not anti-stuff. He's pro-stuff. He wants you to enjoy it. And where the tension, for me, hits an even higher level is, okay, so then when do we get to own it? Because that's a reasonable question, right? Like, are we talking a socialist, communist state where, like, none of us own anything? And here's, it's pretty arbitrary, but I've found it to be incredibly helpful in my family's life. Here's what Fred taught me 15 years ago. And by the way, I didn't work for a church then, so it wasn't this pathetic, like, alms asking thing. But here's what he said. He said, Adam, when you feel like there's something you want, you just commit to God that for at least a week, you're going to ask him to give it to you. Kind of weird, right? Car, house, T-shirt, album, instrument, whatever. He just said, you just pray, like, Lord, just give me that. And it's so strange. And yet I can't tell you how many times I've had these weird confirmations. And again, it's not this like we're asking for handouts. No, not like that at all. But these times where I'm like, I think we really need to get a new car. And we'll pray that prayer for extended time. Like, Lord, I need you to give me a car. And then all of a sudden there's this deal. Like, you can't explain it. Or when we got our house in Helen, I won't even share the story with you, but it was one of those deals like, Lord, here's what we want. You're going to have to give it to us because we can't necessarily afford it and we can never live in this neighborhood and it'll never happen. And boom, like it just, I had it happen recently. I had a friend, I was in a fantasy football league with him, and the winner got $80. And like, that's a lot of money. And so I was excited. I was looking to win this thing. And my friend, I was playing him in the semifinals, and he emailed me and said, hey, let's swap passwords. You run my team, and I'll run yours just to make it interesting. And I said, no, I want to win. Because, like, I need the $80. And I told him, I'm saving for this. And it was this new kind of thing to go with this nerdy hobby that I have. And he shares the hobby. And I wasn't trying to manipulate him, but he said, and I'd been praying that, like, Lord, you're going to have to give me one of these. And he said, I've got an extra one. You could just have mine. Oh, wow, weird. Okay, thanks. But I'm still going to be in fantasy football, and I'll take my $80 and spend it on something else. and I might have. And then, like, you pray that prayer. And here's what Fred said to me 15 years ago. And then on the back end of that, and like, you still feel okay a week, 2 weeks, a month, however long you feel like it takes you to work through that process vertically with the Lord, then buy it. Buy it without guilt. Buy it without debt. Buy it without shame. Just buy it. And see what it is it's a surrendered posture. Like, okay, Lord, I'm just going to kind of try to run my decisions of purchasing through you. And yet at the same time, not get all grabby and not get all weird, like canon stuff, condemning stuff. One last thing. There's a city in Israel, and I've had the privilege of visiting it twice. It's called Beit Shan, and we're going to go through a couple pictures. But see that tree at the very top, at the top of that hill? When you go to Israel, it's kind of weird because it's all dark and it's all drab, and it's mostly like, what you picture going to Israel. Like, and there's a rock, and Jesus spit on it, and there's not a lot there necessarily, and it's pretty dry. But then you get to Beit Shan, and you hike in like that, and you come in over the top of that hill, and then you look down on this incredible city. Go ahead, Jim. You can flip through those pictures. This is Beit Shan is a Decapolis city. It's one of the Greco-Roman cities in Israel. You can see it's white marble. It's beautiful. It's everything that the Israel cities were not. And as I was walking the street that day, I was walking across a mosaic floor. And mosaic floor, that's like the hardwood floor of our day. And it wasn't that one, but it looked like that. And I looked down, and you can see on the edges how they've kind of repaired it. And I looked down, and I actually saw this. It's like a piece of white marble from a mosaic floor. And I reached down, and I picked it up, and I knew what it was, and I knew that some archaeologist in the next couple of weeks could easily kind of graft it back into the deal. And I stuck it in my pocket. And I felt guilty ever since, like that. But I just kind of did that rationalizing thing, and I got back to my motel, and I stuck it in a Ziploc bag, and I flew home. And this week I was thinking about this conversation. And I remembered, oh yeah, there's that mosaic floor thing. And I went to my bookshelf, and I opened this Ziploc bag. I kid you not, for the first time since 2008 when I came back to from Israel, and I reached into the Ziploc bag, and I grabbed this like white piece of marble from a mosaic floor that's 2,100 years old. And I thought, Adam, that's so pathetic. Like, somehow, to validate experiencing the beauty of that, you had to own a piece of it. And we could argue that in my ownership of it, I'm robbing lots of other people of it. What's the little white pieces of mosaic floor? And you're so fixated on having it in your pocket that you're missing the bigger picture.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.